Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for agreeing to sign up for a 2-hour workshop. That wasn't my idea. But really, this is a very shortened course of what I teach during the spring semester. So if you're really hooked on it and you really want to learn more about it, they've allowed me to actually teach 2 classes of this in the spring now, so I can expand it beyond just the College of Science. So those folks from the College of Education and from the College of Engineering, you are welcome to also register for it now, because in the past it has been restricted to only folks within the College of Science. Okay, so just a little disclaimer. But essentially, we spend 16 weeks learning and working with our narrative framework, and today we're going to spend an hour doing it. So it's like really, really intense and really, really fast. But fortunately, I have some of my helpers here today to help with the learning process. So over here, this table, this group are my graduates of our ABT framework that will be helping and coming around and helping you structure your own narrative. So before we get started with everything today, I have asked for some scrap paper to be put on your desk. You're also welcome to use your computer if you have it, but what I would like you to all do is to provide a concise statement, like a one-sentence description of what you want to talk about or focus on today. So the research topic that you're trying to focus on or create a narrative or a presentation for. It could just be a topic overall, just something very short. Don't spend more than 2 minutes on it. And if you can, please write it in a way that you include and but therefore. So for example, this is not really what I study, but I have birds play a pivotal role, such as pollination, seed dispersal, and insect control, and they are integral to maintaining a healthy environment, but they face challenges due to urban development. Therefore, my research is focusing on understanding how urban development affects these bird populations. Okay, really quick, something really fast, don't think too much about it. I'll give you 2 minutes to write it down. I know, commitment. And don't worry, we're going to tear it up, and by the end of this course, we're going to have some really, really great starting points for you for either your dissertation, your thesis, your presentations, your abstracts, or so on and so forth. Okay? Any questions? No? Okay, go ahead.
And what to write something like what we would do if we ever do it. I have one, I just don't know how to put it in my hand.
I didn't realize that it would be so personal. I gotta tell you, I don't know research.
It could be on any topic.
Any topic?
Yeah, anything that you want to work on today.
Ooh, I'm
Just
ready
today.
to.
Doesn't have to be for the future.
Yeah.
I'm in science class. I could write what I'm doing.
Maybe a research paper? Yeah, a paper that you're doing.
Could I borrow a pencil or a pen? Thank you. Okay.
3 words that are written.
I'm working on proton flux.
I am.
Then, and we'll go to the bathroom. Take a breather. Like, no, we could write something on Nigerians.
Like I said, don't get too attached to it. You can even write about your day if you want to. Just something that we can work on for constructing a narrative.
You like writing that? Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you 1 more minute to wrap up your sentences. Yeah, take a seat anywhere, Alex. I'll try. All right, pins down. I know some of you probably just getting started, but that's okay. You can work on it throughout the rest of this presentation. Like I said, we'll have several exercises focused on the statement that you just made. So just a recap of what our agenda, what today looks like for us. So the first hour, I'm going to introduce the ABT to you, talk more about the theory behind it, what does it mean, how do we use it, so on and so forth. Then we're going to have a pizza break at 6:30, and then afterwards we're going to go into part 2, which we previously talked about posters and formatting that, but this year what we want to focus on, or this semester what we want to focus on, is individualized feedback on your ABTs and what you need help with. Okay, so I'll have a couple polls that hopefully work. It's my first time doing polls in PowerPoint, so we'll see. Of what you want to focus on, we'll break you up into groups, and then like I said, I have my helpers here to help focus in on, hey, I really need help on this abstract, hey, I need really help on this presentation, so on and so forth. Okay? So that's what our day looks like. So my first question for you all, this is my first time, like I said, using the polls. If you guys could try to scan this QR code. Look at everyone. Choo, choo, choo. Hopefully it'll work.
Yeah, you pull up your camera and you hover over it, and then it'll pop up to.
Yeah, so if you heard Alex, if you just use your camera, you should be able to pull up the link.
I have to zoom in a little bit. Oh, there it comes. Click on that yellow thing.
Okay, so this would be
Yep.
a poll of why are you here today? So your options are you overwhelmed and unsure of what information that you should share when you're talking to people? You kind of get a little overwhelmed, there's too much stuff going on and you don't really know how to present information? Are you having trouble getting started? You're completely overwhelmed with the literature, you don't know how to present your information, you need help with your writing? Are you having trouble knowing why your research or what you're doing is important? You're having trouble finding what your true narrative is? Are you having issues making your research relevant to different agencies or to different funders? Are you uncertain how to introduce yourself in your research or what you're working on? Or are you uncomfortable with public speaking? Also, you have many options. You don't have to just select one. You can select as many as you feel comfortable with. Okay? And if this all went well, I guess it didn't, our results would show up here, but essentially, I don't know why this isn't working, but it's okay. All of us kind of feel like we're having issues with all of these things, correct? Did everyone select more than one thing? Yeah. And what I will say is the ABT framework, or the and, but, therefore framework, really does help you with all of these problems. And it might not be the solution just for today, but the more that you work with it and the more practice that you do, the more comfortable you will feel talking in front of people, the more comfortable you will feel talking on the spot and just, hey, oh, you want to learn about this? And I'll present this information in certain ways. Or if you have problems with your writing or getting started or organizing your ideas, it will be really, really helpful for that. So I have learned that these polls aren't the best in PowerPoint. But, so one of the best examples that I like to use is this conversation that has happened between Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I'm just going to pull it up here real quick. And what I want you to do is listen to the way that these two men talk, okay? I believe Bill Gates goes first, and then Steve Jobs interrupts him, and then listen to Steve Jobs tell the story, okay? So Bill Gates' story versus Steve Jobs' story, okay? Hopefully you guys can all hear. I'll turn up the volume.
Software in that Apple II computer. Do you want to talk about what happened there, how that occurred?
Yeah, there have been the Altair and a few other companies, actually about 24 that have done various machines, but the 77 group included the PAT, TRS-80, Commodore PAT, TRS-80, and the Apple II. The original Apple II BASIC, the integer BASIC, we had nothing to do with. But then there was a floating point one where and I mostly worked with laws on that.
Let me tell this story. The laws, my partner, we started out with this guy named Steve Wozniak, brilliant guy. He writes this basic that is like the best basic on the planet. It does stuff that no other basic's ever done. You don't have to run it to find your error messages. It finds them when you type it in and stuff. It's perfect in every way, except for one thing, which is it's just fixed point, right? It's not floating point. And so we're getting a lot of input that people want this basic to be floating point. And like we're begging Woz, please make this floating point.
Who's we? How many people are in Apple?
Well, me. We're begging Woz to make this floating point. And he just never does it, you know. And he wrote it by hand on paper. I mean, you know, he didn't have an assembler or anything to write it with. It was all just written on paper, and he'd type it in. He just never got around to making a floating point. Well, this is one of the mysteries of life. I don't know, but he never did. And so, you know, Microsoft had this very popular, really good floating point basic that we ended up going to them and saying, help.
And how much was the, I think you were telling us earlier.
It was $31,000.
That Apple paid you.
All right, so that's pretty much the gist of that story. What was the biggest thing that you noticed about how Bill Gates told that information versus how Steve Jobs told that? It's the same information, it's just told in different ways.
One told a story, the other one was like very almost dry.
Yes, and he listed. He's like, oh, well, in all of this information, it was like specifics that were only specifics to certain types of people, like within his own little group, his own little network, that the outer group, such as us, who don't do this kind of programming, I don't know, maybe some of you guys do some of this programming, but we didn't really understand what those details meant, right? Yeah, so that's a great point. He just kind of listed all this information and not really any structure behind it. What else? What did Steve Jobs do that was a little bit different from Bill?
Well, I gave a little bit of a background of what was the goal or what was the issue, and a little bit about gave credit to another person that kind of told him, hey, you know what, that guy only thought about it, but we actually did more of this.
Right.
But what I also noticed was that Bill Gates was very sure of himself that he was too detailed. And
Very
he didn't
detailed.
try to bite back in.
Right.
He just let Steve Jobs do his thing.
Right.
Until the financial part came up.
Right, and then he's like, let me get back in on this. But yeah, that's the biggest point, is like, Steve Jobs gives you context behind why this information is important. He sets it up, he talks about Steve Wozniak, and he gives information about like what was the problem. He said, but this was it was the best thing that we had, but it had this one problem. And this one problem could be solved with the solution of Windows, right? So we reached out to Windows and blah, 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 right? So you had a complete story of what was happening there, versus Bill kind of just listed a whole bunch of random information and relied on you to connect the dots. That is one of the biggest struggles that we have as academics and as scientists, is that we have a really hard time of creating a structure of information and telling a story out of it. Most of the time when people tell you, if you're gonna go talk to the public, tell a story. But we don't really have a structure of what do we mean by that? Like, how do we tell a story? And what we do instead is we kind of just go around and yell at people and say, hey, listen to what I have to say, right? And that's kind of what, I'm not saying that Bill was like yelling, he's a very smart guy, but he just presented a whole bunch of information and then relied on us to be able to process that information and see what was important and what wasn't important. Versus Steve, he sets up this structure of like, here's the background information you need to know, this is the problem, and this is what the solution was, okay? So that's why it becomes really important to really understand what we mean by story structure. So this has been well established in humanities. All of us have taken our humanity classes in here. And there is a known framework of how stories are structured that have been carried throughout time. The issue in terms of our sciences is that we have a very little, I would say, like knowledge of how do we present information that is consumable to the outer groups or people who do not work in our specific field. So how do we communicate across different fields, because we're so used to just talking to each other and just listing a whole bunch of information and facts. So with that being said, there was a lot of work that has been done trying to understand and study these story structures that happen. And one of these books, a mythologist, Joseph Campbell, has written a book who has analyzed all these different myths and stories based on religion and place, and how these stories are all structured exactly the same way. And this is what is called the hero of 1,000 faces. And if you think about it, all of the stories that we were told as children all have the same kind of story structure. And the way that Joseph Campbell described this, is the monomyth. Okay, so this is what he considers our narrative structure. So with this, we have two worlds. We have the ordinary world, which is here at the top, and then we have the special world. So our ordinary world is considered a non-narrative world where we're setting up what it looks like, the status quo, what is the background, what is the context you need to know to understand what is happening around us. And then there's an introduction of a problem where we move from the ordinary world to the special world. And then in the special world, or the narrative world, we're in search of a solution to the problem. So you'll hear me say story, and you'll hear me say narrative. Okay, those are not interchangeable. Story is the whole monomyth, and narrative is the series of events that occur in turns to find the solution to the problem. Our minds, as humans, we always are problem-solution oriented. Okay, so if you set up a story that introduces this context, or this is the background information you need to know, and here's a problem, you're not going to be able to rest until you find that solution. If you think about any of those series that have a cliffhanger, they do that on purpose because they want you to watch the next episode so that you have the solution to the problem that they introduce at the end. It's gotten me like every time, and then you're just like watching Netflix the entire evening. So that's what we're going to be working on today, is setting up your information that you want to present to your audience in a problem-solution dynamic. And you might be wondering, well, I don't really have a problem-solution dynamic. Don't worry, you do, and we're here to help you find that. So the way that you can also think about this, and I don't have the words on here, but I'll have it a little bit later, is the way that we frame this in terms of an and but therefore is our and is our setup, or our context of the ordinary world. This is information you need to know. Our but is the problem, and our solution is the therefore. Okay? So you can kind of think about some of the research you might be doing, or some of the things you might be trying to answer. Your background, your lit review, is your and statement. Your problem, or what your question you're trying to address, could be your but, and your solution is your research in order to address that question that you might have. Okay, so just to just have some little more interactive, just another visual of this story structure. This is a really great short clip that was made about the hero's journey, and I just want to play a short clip of it for you. I think this is an ad, so. Oh no, this is it. Okay. Everyone can hear it okay, right? Okay.
What do Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo all have in common with the heroes of ancient myths? What if I told you they are all variants of the same hero? Do you believe that? Joseph Campbell did. He studied myths from all over the world and published a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, retelling dozens of stories and explaining how each represents the monomyth, or hero's journey. So, what is the hero's journey? Think of it as a cycle. The journey begins and ends in the hero's ordinary world, but the quest passes through an unfamiliar, special world. Along the way, there are some key events. Think about your favorite book or movie. Does it follow this pattern? Status quo. That's where we start. 1 o'clock. Call to adventure. The hero receives a mysterious message, an invitation, a challenge. 2 o'clock. Assistance. The hero needs some help, probably from someone older, wiser. 3 o'clock. Departure. The hero crosses the threshold from his normal, safe home and enters the special world and adventure. We're not in Kansas anymore. 4 o'clock. Trials. Being a hero is hard work. Our hero solves a riddle, slays a monster, escapes from a trap. 5 o'clock. Approach. It's time to face the biggest ordeal, the hero's worst fear. 6 o'clock. Crisis. This is the hero's darkest hour. He faces death and possibly even dies, only to be reborn. 7 o'clock. Treasure. As a result, the hero claims some treasure, special recognition, or power. 8 o'clock. Result. This can vary between stories. Do the monsters bow down before the hero, or do they chase him as he flees from the special world? 9 o'clock. Return. After all that adventure, the hero returns to his ordinary world. 10 o'clock. New life. This quest has changed the hero. He has outgrown his old life. 11 o'clock, resolution. All the tangled plot lines get straightened out. 12 o'clock, status quo, but upgraded to a new level. Nothing is quite the same once you're a hero. Many popular books and movies follow this ancient formula pretty closely, but let's see how well The Hunger Games fits the hero's journey template.
Sorry, I'm
This Katniss Everdeen hero call to adventure.
gonna stop it there. Does that story structure sound familiar to anyone? Most of the popular stories or books or movies that we see follow the same story structure. There are other stories that have like very open, loose-end resolutions that happen, or multi-narratives and frameworks, and those are really confusing, and some certain types of people are not more comfortable with those because it's not a closed circle. There's no resolution at the end, right? It kind of leaves you hanging. But some of those movies also are still really successful if people are able to understand where the storyline is going, right? So this is the story structure that I was mentioning, and you might be thinking, well, how do we take like all the information that we want to present? Like, do we need to tell like a creative story like this? Like, do we need to have battles and so on? No. What I'm trying to say is what we can do instead is we can utilize this story structure that is innate in us as humans to be able to present our information and what we're trying to communicate in a way that people can understand it better. This becomes really important when you're talking to people outside of your discipline, so you can have conversations. When you talk with people inside the discipline, you could just talk to them like, hey, here's all the information, take that information, and kind of like how Bill Gates was. But when you talk to your outer group, you need to be able to have a better conversation with them and present information in a way that they are able to consume it, rather than just throwing it all at them. So this becomes extremely important because typically when we talk to each other within the same discipline, we kind of just list a whole bunch of information. This is what Bill was doing, Bill Gates. Just, this is the information, blah, 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 blah. And you can kind of think about some of your classes, some of your professors might also have this kind of structure. We're like, okay, here's a list of all the information that you need to know, and not really presenting it in a way that's grabbing you or giving you context or, helping you understand why that information is important. And if we go all the way over to the other spectrum, is if we can become overly narrative, especially us as academics, and I find myself doing this as well, is I kind of think about multiple things occurring at the same time, and what will happen is I'll say, well, this is important, but this is also important, but despite that, this could also be, and I start adding in multiple narratives to that, and it gets really, really confusing. Okay, so you can I kind of like to think of this as like sometimes documentaries are very like and all information. They have been better of like telling stories. And then some of those really complicated movies that have all of those like loopholes that happen, and you're like, what the heck happened? And you have to watch it like 4 times. Like Inception is like one of them. Love the movie, but I'm just like, wait, what? Every time you watch it, there's like a new narrative. And then in the middle is like where it's the happy medium of, okay, I understand what's going on. All of the plot lines have been straightened out. So this is where we want to focus on when we present information to people so that they understand it in a better way. And you've heard me say inner circle, outer circle. Inner circle, again, is people talking within your discipline. Outer circle is people outside your discipline and the general public. Okay? So I'm assuming everyone in here will have to have a conversation with someone outside of academia, correct? Yes? And when you have those conversations, you want to be able to share that information that you've learned or what you're doing or like why it's important that you're continuing your education. In order to do that, you need to be able to present information that is consumable to your audience. Also, if we want to talk between disciplines and have collaborations, we need to be on the same page. If we're both overly narrative, we're not going to understand what anybody is doing. But if we come to this in-between part here, we can really understand like, oh, in your context, this is the information that I think would be helpful. This is helpful in my context, and so on and so forth. Okay? Because we all do this. We're overly narrative when we talk about things. So that's why the ABT framework is really helpful, or the and, but, therefore framework. It has been tried and true in a lot of different avenues. It's not just important in terms of movies. It is really, if you look at New York Times articles, so this is a snapshot that I caught, you can see that they have the setup of their information. This is from a while ago. We have an and statement, then we have here a but statement introducing the problem, and then followed by the solution. Okay, and also I'll talk about but versus however. Nursery rhymes. So Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, but Jack fell down and broke his crown. Therefore, Jill went tumbling after. I think that's how it went. It's close enough, right? right? They're all in that same kind of story structure. If you think of Little Miss Muppet sat on a okay, whatever. You guys get it, right? We can talk about nursery rhymes all day. But those are the ways that you remember it, right? It's that same, like, oh, they did this thing, then they had a problem, and then there's some kind of solution that happened to it. A lot of great speeches have the same story structure where they set up, for example, the Gettysburg Address, and this is definitely abbreviated. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you all. We are a great and mighty nation, but now we're engaged in a horrible civil war. Therefore, it is up to us to mend and end this war. Okay? Of course, movies and TV shows, I've shown you guys some examples from that, such as Breaking Bad. Walter White loves his family, would do anything for them, but when he gets diagnosed with cancer, he becomes desperate to revive the future, therefore he gets involved in the drug trade. For those of you who haven't seen it, sorry, this is a spoiler alert, but it's been out for, I think, like a decade now. Pulp culture, I'd like to include this one. This is Carly Rae Jepsen. Does anybody, this is like 10 years old too. Maybe I need to update some of this. Her song is extremely popular, Call Me Maybe. Hey, I just met you and this is crazy, but here's my number, so call me maybe. Very catchy, millions of hits, millions of views. And also our scientific papers do have an and, but, therefore structure, but we usually typically think of this as the MRAD, or the intro, methods, results, and discussion, but there is an ABT structure that is set up in that as well. So you might be thinking, okay, I keep referring to science. Disclaimer, I am a scientist. I am not a communicator. I was never professionally trained as a communicator until about 2 years ago when I was working with Dr. Randy Olson, who was a tenured professor and who decided to leave academia. I know, we're like, what? Tenured would leave? And he went back to film school and learned about the importance of narrative structure in terms of science communication. And he has since developed this narrative training and now has 6 books. The medicine book just got published. But essentially this narrative gym or this ABT framework is applicable to any discipline, not just science. Even though I keep saying science, it's because I was involved in co-authoring the science version, but we have it for business, politics, medicine, for law, and I'm sure there could be one for education too. Could be for anything, right? Because it's the same structure, you just take it and you apply it to a different set of information, okay? So not just for science, so please don't say, well, you're not talking about my field, but it's for everything. Okay, so now let's get to it. What I can help you with is structuring your information. What I cannot help you with is what your information is, okay? So the way that I like to think about this is that you have content. This is your message, your information, your research, your objectives, so on and so forth. And what we are going to do with the ABT framework, or I'll also call it the narrative structure, is form that and structure in a way that makes sense when you present it to someone else. If you give this to the audience right now, they'd be like, what the heck? What we're going to do is help you format that and structure in a way that would be informative to them, okay? Okay, so the ABT framework, just an overall definition of it, and you've heard me say it like 4 times now, but it's and, but, therefore. And you might be thinking, okay, so it's just a sentence of and, but, therefores, blah, 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 blah. No. What it is you can have paragraphs of and material or content that sets up the problem that you're going to introduce, or it could just be a simple sentence. Okay, it doesn't have to be nonstop sentences of and, but, and therefore in the same sentence. I have had people take that from this training that we've done, and then the professors come to me and be like, why is every sentence just and, but, therefore over and over? So please don't do that. But what I want to just focus on here is that we want to work on the structure, and then we can work on filling in the content of that structure. So again, we're taking our circle and we're kind of stretching it out. So our and material is our non-narrative, and then our but is our contradiction that introduces the problem-solution dynamic. Okay? So you can think of it as setup, problem, solution, or agreement, contradiction, consequence. 3 or 4 different ways to say it. So for example, you love science and you enjoy building your career as a scientist, but you've begun to realize that communication is a part of being a scientist, therefore you're here today. So you might be thinking this is a very simple way to think about structuring information, but there is a primary level, which is just these 3 words. But today we're going to be talking about the secondary level. So this gets a little bit more into the details about what information we put in these different areas. So with this, we're going to be focusing on it within the contradiction. The but is where we start first. So everything is framed around what our problem is, because you need to be able to set up the problem in an appropriate way. So if your problem is you're understanding butterfly patterns, and you set up and talk about the temperature of the ocean, like how are those connected? Okay, so we want to make sure that there's a connection between your and statement and your but statement. And then we'll first start with the contradiction with the but, then we'll go to our agreement, the and statement, and we'll finish up with the therefore. Okay, so most of the time today we're going to be talking about your problem statement, okay, or your but statement. So how many of you have heard in terms of your writing you should not use but instead you should use however? Have you? Oh, not that many people. Okay, some of you? Okay. The reason why is however is a softer transition to disagree or introduce contradiction. It is often used in academia, but not in the public. When people communicate with our outer group, we use but. Like, oh, you have a problem, but you deal with it, kind of thing, right? So when we talk with the outer group, we want to be able to have that contradiction because it activates our brain of like, oh, you say, but there's a problem, there's something going on, and it helps with that contradiction. So the first thing we want to focus on is what is your problem? So the problem is going to excite your brain, and then you want to have a solution to soothe your brain or quiet your brain. That's your therefore statement. And we want to make sure that your problem is set up appropriately. The problem that I have seen with setting up our problem statement or our but statement is that us as scientists have too many problems. We want to talk about a lot of things in a short period of time, but we need to be able to structure information that is more one narrative at a time, so we're not introducing multiple narratives. So our first exercise we're going to do is the 5-word problem. And this is going to be focusing and getting to the core of what your problem is that you are focusing on for your information. I love this one, but there's another one I like. We're going to do 4 exercises. This is one of them. The third one is going to make you really uncomfortable, but it's my favorite one, okay? Just a heads up. This one is we're going to get to the core of what the problem is. And the way that we're doing this is you have 5 words to describe what your problem is. Okay, so I'd ask all of you to write down a sentence that has and, but, and therefore. So your but statement should be but, blah, 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 right? Everyone has and, but, therefore in there? Okay, cool. All A+ for everyone. Okay, so my examples. The problem is, you'll say the problem is, that's not part of your 5. The problem is there's bad resource management. The problem is the method is old or doesn't work. Or the problem is we have bad data. Like, what is that problem that you're trying to address with your work that you're doing? Okay? So we want to try to strip down to the core meaning and get rid of all of the extra information to really hone in on what that problem is and try to identify if you have more than one problem in one statement. Okay? So what I'm going to do is my little team here is going to come around and start helping you hone into what your problem is, that 5-word problem. And I'm going to give us about 5 minutes to talk about this. Okay? And we'll have a couple other exercises to help us with the problem.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Sorry, Jamila, I'll just move this for you.
No, it's all right. Want to go first? We'll say them out loud. Yeah, we'll say them out loud.
Yeah, sometimes it's good to say it out loud so we're not attached to it.
I have to fix work. My Wi-Fi students cannot exit the food service. Oh, there you go. It's fine.
Yes!
So I was 6 nights. Okay. My Lord highs. Students.
Okay, that makes sense.
Outdoor cats what?
Outdoor cat.
Can we go one more time?
Damages are altering elevation.
What do you think?
I have my Wi-Fi students are not equipped. That is 6. I did not account.
Do we need to hear their ABT to see if the problem statement really sums it up, or?
No, just the problem right now.
Okay,
Just the problem. Yep.
Yeah, that's a really great one.
Okay. So I have
My brain.
just gotta find some that's the problem. Always. Oh, I was talking to myself. I'm writing a literature review for Science Con, and I'm gonna choose. Have you heard of the wind farm effects on black whales beaching themselves?
What do you think, like in
Beaches in
general
New
sense?
Jersey? Yeah. So
Your research is focusing on one thing, right?
I don't know how I would narrow that, because like my
And then like kind of
professor.
further into ecology. And then,
Because like people know
so then
like
your problem incorporated some other problems within the discipline, like where they're narrowed that into
so I'm trying to connect like
specifically talk
anatomy
about.
to problems. Like something as new as wind farms, they don't know a lot of research.
So I have, volunteers are older 70 or better, and will stand down. The problem is that retirees have time to volunteer. The problem is retirees are not the strongest solution to volunteer because
So the problem is
Gotcha. So, oyster reefs
unknown information.
Few studies for.
and
You know, like how would you
species
I don't
diversity or species how what?
limited
Habitat.
information.
I can see
It's pretty close, yeah.
Limited information
Right, oyster
on
reefs and
wind
habitat
farms.
use. So my problem is oyster reefs. Or could we specify with oyster reefs? So you said like closing or
It's the point to like
connect it to the whales.
and that's what
Because that just kind of says when
wind farms.
I'm wondering
not enough.
maybe like coastal, like saying something coastal. Coastal ecology or like coastal like habitats or something like that. Is it only oyster reefs? It's only oyster
Trying
reefs.
to relate the two and how they're
Yeah, he would know.
Yeah.
I'm barely,
Volunteers.
I'm like barely like touching the.
Yeah, getting into it.
So really that's your main problem.
Yes, yes, I think so too.
Yeah, and then all of these
would affect each other, right? So like
Yes.
my connection, that bridge is the
Because
auditors.
you used to have
Their ears are so
retirees
sensitive.
volunteering.
That's right.
But now people aren't
I
retiring.
That's right.
And so the problem is, you don't have enough volunteers.
That's exactly right.
Perfect.
Exactly right. This is it.
Awesome.
This is it.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to wrap up your conversations. We'll have more time, I promise.
This is
And you're writing about the age of college. You're writing about, yeah. My problem is that there's increased interest in STEM.
Yes, well, like not like if you were to like come to mind
So like there's like a break.
Yeah, yeah.
someone like that 2 seconds to explain what you're researching.
Like,
If you want, just because
or I
I
should
think
maybe
it's
say,
easier
you
if
don't
you
know
want to do just a chapter. So you could do this for
the increased interest in STEM.
Misunderstanding.
So you could do this for a chapter. Maybe.
The problem is
There's the problem, the focus of the people who are showing this STEM lost interest in
You actually are right. That was good. Okay. So maybe this is my.
All right, folks. I'm gonna pull us all back together.
It's like mine.
Right. Okay.
I've noticed there's already like a really great conversations. I promise we're not done. I want to keep moving because sometimes that 5-word problem is really challenging. I saw some of you counting, right? We get so like stuck on like, oh, we have to have exactly 5 or so on. So I have another way to help us get to the core meaning of what our research is focused on, and I've already seen some light bulbs go off. Okay, but I want to first tell you my other ABT. I have like 40 today. So climate change is putting stresses on wildlife populations, and populations need to be managed, but we need to know their genetics for management, and without a historical record, we can't say what's happening with the population growth, and wildfires are a new threat that needs to be considered, therefore blah, blah, blah. What's wrong with this problem? There's problems, and it's really long, right? But yeah, there's too many problems. So I have underlined all of the problems that are associated here. This is too much. If I say like these are all the problems, to the public or to my outer group, like you guys saw, it's too overwhelming, right? The best way to present this is to break it down, just focus on one problem. And then you can have multiple ABTs to introduce your other problems, right? It's okay if you have a lot of problems, just don't put them all together in the same sentence or the same paragraph or in the same slide, because it's really hard for your audience to understand what you're really trying to do, okay? So we want to make sure that we're reducing the amount of problems that we're talking about. Which gets us to our next exercise to get to the core meaning of our problem. So there's very different ways that we can write ABTs. We can have them be very informational, where they're not very concise, but they're compelling because they have a lot of information. So I've seen some of your writings are very, very long. So they probably have a lot of details in them, but they're not very concise and to the point. We can have a conversational where it's really concise, but it's not necessarily compelling. Or we can have our keeper, which is right in between. So we want to balance the amount of information, and we want to make it concise and compelling at the same time, okay? So we want to make it more conversational and not just lecturing people, right? So we're going to focus on forming different types of ABTs. So for example, this is the first ABT, which is an informational. In my lab, we model blah, 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 but we have realized the importance of molecular pathways or this, therefore, yada, 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 okay? Lots and lots of information. If I went and said this to someone, they'd be like, okay, I'm just waiting for her to stop talking so then I can talk kind of thing, right? Okay, versus if I, am out in public and I'm just talking to someone, I might say, well, we're looking at this one way, but we realize that's not the best way, so we're looking at it this other way. Like literally using those words is not very informative. You don't really know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it or why you should care about it, right? So that's what we call our conversational ABT. So the first one, very long informational ABT. This one, conversational ABT, so not a lot of details. And what we're trying to do is find the middle. So in my lab, we're studying sleep apnea in rats, and we've been focusing on physiological methods, but we realized that there are other controls at the molecular level that are impacting the central nervous system, so we are beginning to explore those molecular pathways. Do you see how the first one was too much information, not really to the core what the narrative was? The second one was no information, and the last one was our keeper. So you might be wondering, okay, well, how does this help me get down to what my core problem is for the research that I'm doing or what I want to talk about? What I want you all to do is to develop a conversational ABT. This is where everyone gets uncomfortable. Because all of us as academics, we get stuck and cling on to all the words. We're like, no, we have to have these words in this sentence. I'm going to ask you to let go of those words and to not write it down. I know everyone's like, oh my gosh, don't write something down. I want you to say with someone across the table with you or a partner and just say, well, I'm looking at this, but we realize this is important, therefore I'm doing this. I don't want you to use any big words. You're going to be talking to like a 2 or 3-year-old. Very, very simple things. I want you to use this, that, no actual nouns or anything. Just very, very simple that you can do. This is why I already see very uncomfortable already. But the reason why I want you to do this is because if you strip away and remove all of those words, you can get down to the core meaning of what you're actually trying to do, right? Because you're not holding on to what the words mean. You're just like, oh, that's actually what I want to look at instead. Okay, so this is another way we can find what the core meaning of our problem is or what we want to focus on for our research or what we're trying to present to people. Okay, are you ready? Everyone's uncomfortable? Good. Okay, and again, my team is going to be walking around and helping you out with that. And I don't want you to write it down. I just want you to have a conversation with someone like, looking at this, but that's not working, so we're doing this. Okay?
Here we go. We're already working.
Yeah. That's it? Okay.
I mean, that's the crux of the.
Help students and
Yeah, that's it.
without the fancy language. Even though it took me forever to learn the fancy language.
We still use the fancy language, you're right.
Therefore, these are
So layers.
and they have this.
Looking at And that's why this is really speaking to me a lot, because I'm looking at story world elements and
Story world.
how we can use them
So I said, like, gender awareness stuff.
Okay.
And the stuff's important.
What about you? I'm looking at how students of color can receive the help they need in school.
Can you frame that in your conversational ABT?
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I did like a one second. I was still in the, like...
Because they're like, we'll move all the other things, but... so there's these people,
Yes,
but they don't... What's the problem?
but they're not receiving...
They're not getting what they need?
They're not getting what they need.
Or people aren't giving them the attention?
The system isn't allowing them.
So there's a problem with the system, not with the people.
Not with the people. Maybe the people, but that's different.
That's a different
A
narrative.
different one. Because, we pick one problem.
Right. Yes, are you learning? Okay.
And therefore, we need to look at it.
Yeah, see? Do you see how you move it? Because we're focusing on the people, not the system. Yeah, okay. Because then that could be your other ABT is like, there's a problem with the system. Okay, so there's these people, but they're not getting what they need. Therefore, we need to get them what they need.
Yes.
Or do we know what they need? Or we need to find that out?
We know what they need.
We know what they need. So why aren't they getting it?
The system has something set up. And
So it is the system. It's not the people that's preventing them from getting what they need.
it's system and people.
So it's both of them.
So I'm just addressing the system right now. So it's people aren't getting what they need, and the system is supposed to get them what they need, but studies show that the system isn't getting them what they need. So we need to learn the system.
So then the way that you just said it there, the way that I'm seeing like your main character of your story is the system. Because they say they're doing this, but they're not doing it, and therefore they need to do it.
And then the people version would be the people aren't getting what they need, and there are people who identify what it is that they need. But research shows that when people are identifying what they need, it doesn't really serve what they need. So therefore, we need to do something about that.
Interesting. But do you see how like we remove all of that information and we get to like the core of what's really going on with your different.
Am I making sense to you?
Huh?
Am I?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No, yeah, it is. It's making total sense to me. But I know it sounds like kind of gibberish.
Okay.
That didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I'm so deep in it, all of it makes sense.
Well, I think that's the important thing of thinking about, okay, like this is the first thing, this is the first problem, this is the second problem, this is the other problem. And then you can kind of structure your paper in that way. Like let me set up that first problem.
Like conversations, for sure.
And that too, right.
I'm a word vomit person. And then when I'm excited, it comes out.
Right.
And I can't reel it back.
Yeah, no, that happens though. So you have to be able to understand, like, I have all this information I want to share, but how do I give that to people in a way that they overwhelm them?
I feel like I assume people are in my inner circle a lot.
Right.
And then suddenly I'm just having this conversation and I'm seeing these
You don't know how to stop it.
Yeah, I don't know how to stop it.
And they're just like, I'm sorry. No, I think that's good though, because we've identified there's multiple things going on. Right, okay, good. So I'm just keeping track of time.
What motivates those
Yeah, I'll say that.
and then the ones that are
Okay, folks, I'm going to pull you back together. Like I said, we'll have some more time to work through this. How is everyone feeling about their problem? Feeling good? How about this table over here? Ladies, are you feeling good about your problem? Well, in a good way about problems? Yeah? Okay. So now we've only talked about one aspect of the ABT, the B, right? So let's go and talk about the and. So once we understand what our problem is, then we can work our way up to the setup of that problem, okay? So we're going to talk about the agreement. So when we're talking about setting up the ordinary world, this is a template that was developed by the ABT Framework Working Group that has been going on for, 3 years now. But But the way that we like to think about it is you don't want to start with bad news. If you go to the public and you say everything is dying, right, then they're going to be like, okay, well then I can't do anything about it. But instead what we want to do is we want to start an agreement. We want to get buy-in from our audience. Okay, so the way that we can also frame this is we have heaven and heaven, or like everything's perfect, or everything's really great, but this thing is happening, but hell, therefore action. Okay, the way that we can frame it. Not literally saying these things, but kind of the contextualizing it of like, you know, these things are really important and we need them, but they're dying, therefore let's do something about it. Okay? So that's why I have it written up right here. What happens with us is we like to start with the bad news. And when we start with bad news, our story isn't necessarily relatable. It's already contradicting. It's already conflict. And your audience is like, no, thank you. You need to set it up first, and then I will be introduced to the problem and go from there. So when we talk about our story, we want to make it relatable to the audience that we're talking to. We want to establish a common ground with them to open up a channel of communication. Okay, like I said, you go to them with bad news, they're going to automatically shut down. And you want to lead with material that's relatable. Okay, so not conflicting to anyone. Saying like, oh, the sky is blue, right? You could set it up like that. That's something that people are like, oh yeah, you're right, it is that color, so on and so forth. So you might be wondering, and my work involves climate change, which is very controversial in some areas. So you might be wondering, well, how do we actually set it up and talk about these problems that we're having that might be conflicting or might be opposing to people's feelings about things and not really receptive of that? Here's a really great example by a climate scientist, Catherine Hayhoe, who has talked about how to talk about the changing environment in a way that people are receptive and it's relatable to them. So what she says is you start with, you know, we all love West Texas landscape, and that's where she lives. She says, and so do I. But we can also see that the climate is changing and harming our way of life. Therefore, we need to make changes so that it doesn't get worse. Okay? So you can have that introduction instead of just saying, the environment's changing, you need to do something about it, which is what we usually do as scientists. We're like, alert, alert, alert. We need to set it up in a way that is receiving to our audience that is relatable to them, okay, and doesn't challenge or have that contradiction. We want to begin with our shared values. So what we're going to be doing is we have two parts of our and statement. You can't just throw random things in there. What you want to do is we want to have the what and the why. So what would be like, what are you talking about, okay? So I think I heard some people, I heard mostly about STEM education. So you can say STEM education is educating students in technology, science, technology, and so on and so forth. And it's important, so the why, the what's at stake, why is it important, and why should we care, right? So we introduce what we're talking about, and we say why it's important. Then we introduce our but, then our therefore, okay? So you might be thinking, okay, so what exactly do I need to talk about? And this is from Saturday Night Live. Doctor, we know this. Okay, so sometimes you'll hear people say, we all know that the sky is blue and that grass is green, right? Something that everyone knows or that is non-controversial and it's relatable, okay? So the way that we like to say this is material, you know, a climate skeptic or any kind of skeptic would agree with you about. So for example, there are 50 acres of woods next to my house, okay? I'm like, okay, cool, I'm taking your word for it. Okay, so that's what. And then our why is it important? And this is really important because we want to be specific about why something is important and have details of that. Not just say, and it's important. People are like, well, why is it important? You want to provide information on that. So you can say, for example, I have 17 vacuum cleaners in my house, but one of them is broken. Does that really sound like a problem to you? Because you have 16 other ones, right? What if I said, I only have one vacuum cleaner in my house and it's broken, but it's broken? That is a problem, right? So it's all about how you present that information. Okay, so you don't want to have, well, I have 17, also, why do you have 17 vacuum cleaners? But if you have one and it's broken, then it is obviously a problem. So you want to make sure that you present information that is important and you provide information that is specific to why it's important at the same time. Okay, so for example, this is another ABT example. Climate change is putting stress on wildlife populations and the populations need to be managed. That's my and statement. What is the problem with this and statement?
It's negative from the beginning.
It's negative, right? Climate change. Everyone's like, whoa, right? So we want to make sure that we rephrase that so that we don't have climate change in there. Or at the beginning, we want to introduce it later. So instead we can say conservation genetics is an essential part of wildlife management. And with a thorough knowledge of genetic diversity and population structure, we can make sound management decisions, okay? We say what conservation genetics is, we say why it's important and relevant to management decisions, but we don't have that, therefore we need it, okay? Also, you can use if and then to strengthen your and statement. If you put if then in your and statement, it invokes hope. Okay? So conservation genetics is essential, and if we understand basic genetic problems, then we can manage our populations, but we're not doing it. Okay? You can also put the if then statement in the but statement, and that invokes fear, which is what I like to do. So for example, actually I have an example later, so we'll get to that then. But you can also put the if-then statement to say what could be the best thing if we do have this, then we can understand this, but we don't have it. So you can see that can be more of a contradiction when you get to the but statement. Okay? And I'm just going to go into our therefore statement before you guys work on your ABT a little bit more, is looking at the consequence, which is usually what your research is focused on, right? So your background information, you introduce the problem, what's the knowledge gap, and your therefore is your research. Most of the time, how you're addressing that knowledge gap. So there's a really big power of movement between your brain when you introduce a problem and when you solve that problem. And what we like to do with our and but therefore statements is have a very dynamic change to really catch the attention of your audience. What I even do in some of my classes is I randomly just say but, and then people are like, oh, all alert, right? Because they're like waiting for a problem and a solution to that problem, right? So we want to help with that movement and that alertness in your brain. So our first movement is our problem, introduction of the but, which excites the brain, and then we need this a transition from the but statement to the therefore statement to help soothe the brain. So there's ways that we can do that in terms of our therefore statement, and it's based on the what and the how. So I'll first start with scientists, and I can't speak for the other disciplines, but definitely in science, what we tend to do is when we talk about things, we like to introduce the how first, or the methods, okay? And then we tell you what the results are, because we want to show you that we are very thorough, and these are the methods that we do, and so on and so forth. But everyone else wants to know what first, and then how afterwards. Okay? So for example, let's say your friend's talking and she has this very dramatic story, or they have this very dramatic story, and they're telling you like the process in which they gain that information. Then just tell me what you found out, right? I don't even know how you found it out, I just want to know what you found out, right? Give me the gossip. Okay, so it's the same thing with the public or with our outer groups, is they want to know the what first, then the how. And this is really important for our transition, because let's start over here first. This is how we typically do, write our sentences, or even write our papers. But conservation genetics has not been identified as a priority in the limited budget because there's causing no genetic research. So what is that there's no genetic research, right? That's the problem. And then this is, everything before that is the method in which we don't have genetic research, okay? Versus, but no genetic research is currently conducted because we have a limited budget, so on and so forth. Do you guys see the difference? Give the answer, or the what, right after the but statement, or right after you say but, versus at the end. It becomes more powerful. And I have a really great example to show you about that. You can also do the same thing, or you should also do the same thing in your therefore statement. Therefore, we're going to do all this stuff to get genetic research part of our program. Or you say, therefore, we're going to make it an integral part of our program, and this is how. Just get to the chase faster. Give the answer right after the transition. So, this is a really great quote by a very prominent scientist in my field, where she talks about how our oceans are changing. So her and but therefore statement is, the ocean is important in many ways, and because it was so big, we didn't think we could hurt it. But we overfished, we polluted, we heated, and we acidified the ocean, and now it's dying. Therefore, we have to change our ways if we want the ocean to be healthy again. What do you guys think? They're like, yeah, it's good. And it is good, but we can make it stronger. What if we say, the ocean is important in many ways, and because it's so big, we didn't think we can hurt it, but it's dying because we did these things. What is more powerful? What do you guys think? First one or second one? Second one, right? You get to the chase a lot faster, right? But do you see how it's the same exact words? It's just changed where I put them. Because you're alert and your brain is like waiting for this and the transition is more dynamic than, but all this information and then the solution, then the actual thing, the what. But, how, blah, 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 what, right? So just get to it a lot sooner. So that's kind of like the quick and dirty of the ABT. I know it's a lot, but remember, we do have our pizza party, and then we have time to work on and scoping your ABTs. But I just want to briefly say, well, this isn't just about a sentence, right? This is about more than that. This can be used for elevator speeches. Okay, so some of you might feel overwhelmed. You're like, I want to say some things to this person, but I don't really know how to say it. You can have this structured already, this information. Okay, first I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, I'm this person, and I'm introduced, and I've been to this place, and I've worked here, but now I'm here, so therefore I'm looking at this. Or you can say, my previous work has looked at this and that, but we didn't look at this, so now I'm looking at that. Okay, do you see how you can do and, but, therefore in that way? Of course, you can use it for abstracts. You can use it for presentations. Okay, so you think about when you give a presentation, you need to set it up. You need to introduce your problem, and your solution is your presentation of the research that you're doing or the methods that you're doing for that research, right? Same thing. And also use it for proposals and papers. Okay, again, you shouldn't have nonstop sentences that have and, but, therefore in them, but you can have it set up of, and this is the material that you need to know, but these are the problems, or this is the problem and maybe more problems, therefore these are the solutions. Okay, so you can see how we can structure it and move on from there. So here's an example of a conference abstract. This is my abstract here. This blue material is all my and. It's just setting up that corals are important. This is the problem, and then the solution is what my work is focused on. Okay, so you can structure your abstract like that. Example. Your presentations, you can include your, oh my gosh, your background information. Oh no. And then you can introduce your problem. I was doing so good with the smart TV too. Okay, your problem, and then your research approach is your solution, like I mentioned earlier. Or this is like I was saying with your elevator speeches. This is what I've done prior, but this is what I'm doing now with grad school, therefore this is what I want to do afterwards. Or you can make it your context. This is my context, this is the question that I have, and this is the research that I'm doing. So you can kind of make it about yourself, like what your journey has been, or you can make it about the research that you're doing when you're introducing yourself to someone. Okay? Just the different ways of how you structure information. And also for papers and proposals. So context, question, and solution. One of the biggest things that I have issues with, I don't know if anyone else has this problem, but sometimes I get like information overload and I'm not really sure how to start. What I've done is I kind of just thrown all of that text on a Word document, and I go through and I say, oh, this is a therefore statement, or this is a problem statement, or this is an and statement. And what I do is then I go, okay, if this is my problem, then I need to set it up. Okay, let me write something to set that up. Okay, this is the problem, now it needs a solution. Let me write a solution for that. And you can kind of see how you start building paragraphs just based on that information you throw on your slide. It happens really, really fast because you kind of have an idea of how to approach something instead of just being like all over the place and not knowing a logical way to write that information. It's extremely, extremely helpful. Or you can be like, oh, I introduced this problem and I didn't set it up. Okay, let me add that real quick. Also, you can just use it in your life in general. Like you can kind of think about, okay, I'm going to just talk to someone and I want to talk to them about this problem that I have, but first I need to give them that information so they understand the problem better, and then they can help me find a solution to that too. And what I will say, just being able to put sentences together in a way that makes sense to give to someone else does help with your confidence, right? Because what happens is we tend to overthink about things and what we're going to say to people, and then when we go to say something, we are so stuck in our head that we're not able to perform in the way that we would like, right? Instead, if we have a structure that's already formatted in our head, we'd be like, oh, yeah, we know what we're going to say, we know how we're going to say that, and we know how we're going to present that information, right? And even when you receive information, you kind of already receive it in that same way. And it just becomes really helpful with your confidence in talking with other people, or even being able to get up here and talk in front of people. Because what happens And, everyone's guilty of this. Some of us script our talks, right? Well, what happens if you miss a note or you miss a sentence? Then you're completely thrown off, right? But what if you know the structure in which your information is going to be presented? You don't know exactly the exact words you're going to say, but you know the ideas that you need to say in order to introduce things. You'll be able to talk and give your presentations on spot without having to sit down and write out every single thing and still have that confidence. Okay? Because it gets really easy to, once you start doing this more and more and you practice it more and more, then you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And then when you get up here and you present, you're like, okay, I'm talking about this, I'm setting it up, and the next thing I'm going to talk about is a problem, right? And then of course the solution has to come next. And you kind of find that natural rhythm or that narrative intuition of like, okay, I've set this up and I introduced a problem. Now I better give a solution or talk about a solution to that before people get too angsty, right? Or it gets too long run on and so on and so forth. Okay, and then the last thing I have before our pizza party is that you all might be feeling like this might be really overwhelming, or you might feel like it's very, very simple. So I don't know if anybody's seen this before. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Essentially, it's a little pixelated, but on the x-axis, it's like your experience, if you know nothing or you're an expert, and then on the y is confidence. So typically when we know nothing, our confidence is really, really high, and the more that we learn about something, we realize our confidence goes down, right? And then eventually we get to become an expert where we're like pretty confident, but not that confident about how much we know. That's academia in one slide. So you might be feeling like you're sliding down this curve right now into the bottom, or you might be still up here and eventually you'll come back down, or you'll come back up on the other side. But what I will say is that the more you practice this, the more that you talk with other people and you practice this narrative intuition, the better it will be, because everyone's like, oh yeah, but the way that you set that up doesn't really make sense because it's not connected to your problem, and why is that important, and so on and so forth, right? So what we've been trying to do is build a community here of people who have this narrative training, who can help each other with their information so that we're always practicing and we're always communicating among each other and strengthening our collaborations across our different disciplines. So if you have other questions, I have some resources for you, especially with Dr. Randy Olson. He does narrative trainings as well. He has a YouTube channel with a podcast. We have a whole bunch of Narrative Gym books that you can get online, and I have other resources as well to share with you all, and also this PowerPoint. Okay, we'll make sure that this PowerPoint's available to you. Okay? Okay, I went 9 minutes.